In this video, I'm going to talk about why the X-Men belong in the animated format, and to do that, we have to go back to their origins. In 1963, Stan Lee's X-Men graced the comic book universe. Initially, the X-Men weren't the solidified version we see today. Its creators didn't really know what to do with the characters until Wolverine, Colossus, and others joined the team in Giant X-Men 1. From there, the X-Men went through many stories, but their power was as a team dynamic and through their allegory of a marginalized community, something an audience could easily latch onto. Their outsider thematic cut through superficial superhero action and allowed for great storytelling, keeping you engaged with the characters. I've never actually read these comic books, as my introduction to the X-Men was through the Fox movies, which I thought were pretty good. Though those movies were entertaining blockbuster films, fitting so many characters into feature films meant that much of the charm of the X-Men was lost. To put it simply, the interpersonal dynamics were more restrained, and that's where I feel like the new X-Men 97 series thrives, a loyal continuation of the original 90s series. Whereas the films had to cut back on light-hearted moments to prop up a movie's narrative, this series has the benefit of animation. The stories are tight and snappy due to their shorter runtime, but the fact that we get episodic content means we get to follow these characters for longer. From my perspective, the blend of nostalgia and originality has been balanced perfectly, and I've been enjoying tuning into weekly episodes over a live action outing. The show is inherently nostalgic in reviving the classic cartoon, but as someone who hadn't watched that cartoon, the nostalgia never interfered. I just accepted this as a different version of the X-Men. There are some small alterations from the X-Men 90s series, but for the most part the show has stayed loyal. X-Men 97 even got me to watch the original series, so I think it's a pretty good show. And though that show is a little dated, I'd say it's the definitive version of the X-Men along with this new series. In my opinion, both are far better than the movies. X-Men 97 benefits from jumping straight off of the prior 90s series, meaning these characters already have history that works well. The X-Men movies solidified the basic premise of the X-Men into popular culture, so this allows the new series to continue from that charm of the 90s series while telling all new stories that just wouldn't be possible in more serious movies. The genre of animation allows for all of the cheese and glamour of the comic book adapted to screen, being a far more faithful look at the X-Men that bears it all, not making them more grounded for a certain audience. The format of animation allows for campier stories. It's amazing how simple the answer to reviving the X-Men was for Marvel, the choice simply being to revert to an older desktop with new sensibilities. A classic, as it were. If I'm being honest, initially I wasn't a huge fan of animation, but recently with the rise of shows like Invincible and Harley Quinn, I've come to have an appreciation for how freeing the animated format can be. Marvel Studios have nailed X-Men 97 so far because it has returning voice actors, a similar animation style to the original, and a classic tone infused with newer sensibilities. The animation is smoother than before and the story's different, but there's a clear lineage to the past. I can't imagine how satisfying it is to fans who grew up on the original to see a sequel series. I, for one, can say this show has finally invested me in the X-Men. This feels like the format these characters belong in. If Marvel is to continue successfully, it needs to spend more time on less content and give each installment some personality. This series stands out as fresh for that reason after so many lackluster outings and Disney Plus shows recently. I'm hoping that its success will signal some small change. Unlike more predictable returns, I don't think the return of this series was really expected, and I think that's another reason it worked. Smartly, the show doesn't rely on you having watched the 90s series, as the death of Professor X feels like grounds for an intriguing pilot anyway, and if you're so inclined, it serves as a backdoor pilot to the original. Consequently, Xavier's death stirs up some serious change for Magneto. I love it after Magneto's history, X-Men 97 has dedicated a change to the character, having him become an ally over a villain. This, of course, changes course later in the season, but that's the beauty of the intrigue. You can see why Magneto made this change, and that he did respect Xavier's wishes originally. He just sees the world in a very different way to Charles. Magneto is such a great villain because his motivations are so understandable. Charles opposes the bigotry Magneto does, but Charles is far more sympathetic in humans, trusting in diplomacy over rampant paranoia. Fueled by hate, Magneto lost himself to revenge. The intimate friendship between these two created great stories, and it continues to in X-Men 97, acknowledging the history as it progresses its characters. Their intimate friendship is why someone called Magneto can be taken seriously despite his ridiculous costume and title. The internal struggle at the heart of the character is key. X-Men 97 allows the character to grow in the light of Xavier's death and learn a new approach before going back to the character's roots. You can see both Magneto and Xavier's reasoning, which makes the internal conflict so difficult. The two characters are both complex, like the X-Men. X-Men 97 looks back at a style that's not been seen in a while, one that revives a sense of something new. The show isn't complex, but it's fun to watch and thematically relevant. It's great to watch the X-Men be characters as well as superheroes, to have small talk in between saving the world. And this is where the series shines. How can audiences enjoy a series of characters if there's no character expression? These kinds of mistakes would serve to break your immersion into the universe, like in the Fox movies. We didn't really get to know the X-Men all that well in the films, but here we'll watch them weekly, slowly opening the door in these characters with upcoming seasons. In this way, it's unfortunate that so many people overlook the power of animation, a fantastic format for creative stories. If done poorly, animated shows can leave a bad taste in your mouth, but when done correctly, they often surpass live-action material. The format of popping in to watch your characters for 30 minutes and moving on just works effortlessly, instead of trying to glue you to a screen for 2 hours. Reportedly, younger people have shorter attention spans due to the rise of short-form content, such as TikTok, so this also benefits younger viewers, perhaps being their definitive viewing experience of the X-Men. Now, this series could go downhill. It could eventually have all the cheese and action without the heart of its characters, but so far the show has a strong direction, and I'm confident in it going forwards. X-Men 97 isn't perfect. The fourth episode, for example, goes for a high concept, having Jubilee stuck within a video game of memories and so forth. To me, this idea felt like complete fanfiction, something that I just don't think works or makes sense for an X-Men story. It felt like a pointless episode that detracted from the wider narrative of the series. However, for the most part, the series works. Watching X-Men 97 made me desire more animated superhero content from Disney+. It's bound to go over better than a live-action limited series that will probably be quickly forgotten. Hopefully we get a great Spider-Man animated series again, or something similar if X-Men's viewership continues to hold strong. The X-Men movies started as a huge success, but they really went out in a whimper with Dark Phoenix. Recently, Charles returned to Doctor Strange 2, and Wolverine is set to return in Deadpool 3. Despite these cameos, the X-Men franchise is mostly sleeping, and I think its return in this animated venture is equally a safe and faithful return to screens. To bring back X-Men to the movies would be risky given the huge gap in movies and would probably be pretty bland and calculated. Here, this version of the X-Men works because it's fun and breezy. There are so many superhero movies with repetitive plot structures and action scenes, but having this restructured in animation really changes the vibe and format. Every fight is full of endless opportunities due to animation, and the storylines are only limited to the writer's imagination. With movies, your ideas have to be tightly honed into a 2-hour story, but with animation, the characters can breathe. I've been talking a lot about X-Men 97, but I want to talk about the live-action entries. In the Fox films, Bryan Singer completely disregarded the comic book essence of X-Men, and it clearly shows. It's a product that's made to be accessible, but those films have no real passion behind them. The creators didn't care about the characters, which meant there was a lack of development. The characters were two-dimensional. That lack of growth meant that many action scenes held no emotional weight. The movies focused a lot on Wolverine and Xavier, but not any of the other X-Men. The X-Men is a huge task because it involves a team of characters. And you have to service each of those characters for us to care about them. If you don't develop them, then they'll lack the potential that they should. The X-Men are a great vehicle for moral messaging and a dynamic of support, but these elements mean nothing without the proper setup. This is where Logan excelled. A character piece focused solely on Wolverine and Charles. It had the time to tell a thoughtful story, one that still had great action. The film felt unique, and James Mangold clearly had passion for the project. Basically, the movies prioritized what looks cool, action, and superpowers over any real heart. They were pretty serious affairs lacking humor, and though the X-Men naturally touch on serious stories, the animated series created a really light tone that works really well. In a world that persecutes them daily, they joke together or quip during an action scene, something really fun that just highlights a sense of community. These elements give the characters a sense of optimism and flair. In contrast, the movies often follow their characters in dire stakes or high-octane scenarios, but the animated format and melodramatic voice acting made these sequences fun and punchy, accompanied by that pulpy theme that's so iconic. Despite being aimed at kids, the show portrayed rallies against mutant kind, mutants alienated from their parents when discovered to be different, and more. In the series, bigots often call mutants filthy. I don't think I need to point out the clear allegories this puts forwards. As we get to know the X-Men and their very human relationships, it's clear how misguided the other side are. In the episode Beauty and the Beast, we see Beast hateful of himself. Despite his mutant gifts, they endanger the woman he loves, causing fear when he gets close. These feelings make Beast depressed and resentful, only compounded by public opinion. It's a great episode in the series that's very relatable. A strong example of the animated series is great storytelling. Eventually, Beast finds love in an open heart, and the two decide to be together despite risk. Beast may appear like a monster, but he has a very sensitive heart underneath that blue appearance. Appearance-wise, the films had many X-Men feature as human over their mutant appearance to save on costs or ease the actors, but animation means these kinds of problems aren't here. The X-Men wearing ridiculous costumes and appearing different is an essential reminder they are different, the very core of their identity. They are comic book characters that happen to wear bright colours, and that has style. This too was missing in the films. The original cartoon did a great job of highlighting the X-Men's struggle to fit in, to smooth over fragile human relations, and this is something I don't think the movies ever excelled at. To see such animosity is harsh entertainment, but great from a thematic standpoint. Without that struggle, the X-Men would have no human motivation beyond flashy fights and cool costumes. This plight is how we're drawn into their cause. Mutant brothers banding together can represent any minority. This means it's really not hard to paint yourself as an X-Men character, as ostracization is relatable. In the OG series, we really have the time to look up to Charles Xavier, the X-Men's fearless leader at the helm. We see Jubilee enter the world of the X-Men, friendships form, training, so much more than what's in the Fox movies. The Fox movies didn't really show the X-Men just hanging out together, which is crucial to let characters breathe. It's something plaguing a lot of superhero properties, making their stories a vehicle to a punchline over human stories that happen to have action. If all the characters do is fight all the time, they're going to feel like artificial creations, lacking depth. It's impressive how well the 90s series compressed longer comic book stories, adapting them well to an episodic format. The episode Cold Vengeance is a great example. After an encounter with Sabretooth, Wolverine spends most of the episode in peace, bonding with other people. This kind of relaxed story is something a film would probably struggle to incorporate. It's memorable for just featuring Wolverine in a happy mood fishing, a small but essential character moment where he forgets mutant problems. The rest of the episode sees the other X-Men plan to holiday on a beach. It's such a great choice to split Wolverine up from the team here, and I would say it's one of the standout episodes of the series. The 90s series truly is the most accurate depiction of these characters outside of the comics. In the original series, Charles was a great leader, often the perfect diplomat to quell issues between the X-Men, founding their unified vision. Other characters didn't fare as well. Cyclops was a very bland character in the movies, but I'd say this is also true of the animated series. He's your classic no-nonsense superhunk, but with no real internal conflict or history compared to Charles, Jubilee, and Jean Grey. It didn't help that James Marsden is all looks and no ability. He's a very lackluster actor portraying a 2D character. In juxtaposition, Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart infused their characters with lots of charisma. In my opinion, there's just a lot to love from the 90s series, and I can really see why they've made a continuation. If you were to watch the movies without watching the series, you would probably have a good experience, but you'd have a larger-than-life perspective on the X-Men, not seeing the simplicity in most of the franchise's stories and how much smaller scale it can be. The series has the time to embrace the subject of bigotry. The X-Men accept their differences, not wanting to be cured, but simply accepted. Don't get me wrong, the OG series is full of action and not a character drama, but it has a lot more personality that's easier to watch. I think the continuation shows promise of being even better than the 90s series, with modernized pacing so far. Marvel have struck gold by going back to the X-Men's simplistic roots, not turning them into something alien and devoid of charm. In an era of so many endless franchises, I think this show showcases that a change of style and scenery can really refresh a brand. This is a new chapter in the X-Men's history, and so far, it looks to be a bright one. Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, please subscribe and consider joining Patreon. Links in the description below.